Today we're paying homage to one of the OGs of the Fallout universe, Scott Bennie. Scott Bennie began his gaming career in the early 1980s, writing for tabletop RPGs like Champions, RuneQuest, and Traveler. During this time, he contributed to several D&D campaigns, most notably working on the legendary Forgotten Realms supplement. He later joined Interplay in 1990, developing, producing, and writing for the Lord of the Rings Volume 1 PC game. Afterwards, he worked on other classic Interplay titles such as Star Trek 25th Anniversary, Castles 2 Siege and Conquest, and Battle Chess 4000, before moving on to his magnum opus, at least for our community, Fallout 1. His work on the project was limited, regulated to player messages and level design on areas like the hub, but during this time he did create two of the series' most iconic elements. First, he made the Mysterious Stranger perk, one of Fallout's most memorable abilities and one that's appeared in the majority of future entries. Perhaps most notably, he also suggested the Dogmeat Companion name, a name that's now synonymous with the series. Afterwards, he worked on both Fallout 2 and Starfleet Command, before leaving Interplay and joining Sony Online Entertainment in the early 2000s. After a long, incredible career in the industry, he sadly passed away recently at the age of 61. He touched the lives of countless gamers over his storied career with his creativity and passion for the art form. To end this video, I'm going to read a eulogy posted by Fallout 1 and 2 designer Jesse Heinig. In it, he memorialized Scott Bennie in a way that only a dear friend and colleague could. Writing eulogies is one of those undesirable tasks that I nonetheless must do, because the people who have left an indelible mark upon us and our community must be remembered well for their contributions. Robert Bennie was the second writer I met in the game industry. The first was Chris Taylor. Scott, as he liked to be called, was one of the pillars of game design at a time when TSR was at the height of its creative powers. He contributed in a big way to Champions, the superhero game that made huge strides in game design principles for point and power-based gameplay, and to D&D, writing material for Ravenloft, the Forgotten Realms, and more. He was prolific, often writing and sharing stories solely for amusement value, not merely as a career. He also had the great pleasure to write for Star Trek, creating memorable missions in the early Star Trek games and working with the original series actors, a real dream come true. Scott ran a D&D game that I played back in the 2nd edition days of the hobby, while we both worked at Interplay. He was a quick-minded and adept dungeon master who was one of the early adopters of the notion that you played by the rules to give an even playing field, but your goal was to craft interesting challenges, out of which stories would arise as the players faced those challenges in their characters' own idiosyncratic ways. The Champions Online community knew Scott as Thundrax. He was a frequent and amicable participant. For many people, role-playing is a chance to try to play, for a little while, as someone different. But for Scott, Thundrax seemed like, what if Scott had superpowers? He was kind, thoughtful, and ready to help, all qualities that Scott carried in spades. Without getting into the dregs of, Scott was such an inspiration for living with a disability, Scott was always a kind and inspirational person. He also happened to suffer from a significant disability. These were just two facets of who he was. For the able-bodied, there's a tendency to conflate these sort of things or set them in contrast. He was such a good guy in spite of his pain and difficulty, / his disability meant that he knew what it was like to be powerless. But Scott wasn't defined like that. Who he was depended on the choices he made, and he chose to be kind and inspirational. That he did so regardless of his own hurdles was just another testament to his character. Scott had a very hard time at the end, with many things going wrong and the caregivers who were supposed to help him instead failing him. The close friends that he made during his career gave him some comfort, and that's a good reminder of the importance of being good to others and making friends rather than enemies. I don't have Scott's eloquence or his gift for surprising twist and style, so I shall leave off with a Thundrax quote that seems apropos. I am blessed to have an extraordinary number of good friends, and many of them have a much higher opinion of my abilities than I do. I have the typical Canadian suspicion of compliments. I'm afraid, and my ego is already too damn big.